This season of Give Up After 3 is brought to you by the book of the same name, Give Up After 3, a historical analysis of Sherlock's lost final episode, where I take all of the research we've done from the show across the seasons and all of the learnings and findings and condense that into a full academic book. It's fun, it's lighthearted, but it also has a lot of the more interesting things we discovered and worked through. So if you want a way to support the show and also get something really interesting, you can find that at zeroindent.com/store. That's zeroindent.com/. What's happened here? What? I have questions.
This is a personification of how I felt watching that episode and concluding our entire series with that episode. And I'm sure for all your audio listeners, this is quite interesting.
Yeah, look, Darth is, in no uncertain terms, dressed like a clown. I guess is the easiest way to but sort of a summery clown look. Like you sort of the vest right there is sort of and it's also Darth branded as well. You know, it's got the logo, and whatnot. Incredible work. I put zero effort in. I just put the coat back on, because I was like, this does not deserve any more effort. And fancy clothes, but I figured I'd get a second use out of this so I can write it off on tax, right? Like that's, it's a work expense. Yeah, look, we should get into it. I don't know how long this recording session's going to be. Probably either really long or really short. We'll see how we go. Welcome back to Give Up After 3, a critical analysis of BBC Sherlock, examining each episode to understand how things went so wrong the fans invented a secret final episode to justify why the show had been bad all along. You can find show notes and sources at zeroindent.com/giveupafter3. And if you want episodes early, well, I guess this is the last episode, so this no longer applies. But if you want to support us,
no more early.
If you want to support us, you can head over to patreon.com/zeroindent. I'm DC McNeil, author and editor-in-chief at Zero Indent, and I'm joined, as always, for our final episode by YouTuber Darth. How you doing, man? How are you feeling going into the last episode here? Are you psyched? Are you scared? What's the vibe?
With this one, I am like the most confused and angry that I've been yet for these recordings.
That's somehow possible. If that's somehow possible after season 4, episode 1, I was editing that the other evening, and that completely broke you. Like you were like half of the man that you used to be in that episode. Like it was just. There was a moment where you were trying to explain like a plot point of the episode, and your brain just sort of like short-circuited, and you kind of went like blank behind the eyes. So I'm excited to sort of get an idea of how you went.
Sorry, my Batman watch just started up and it made noise.
Oh, that high tech.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
legitimately
totally not it.
It's legitimately a Batman
It's totally not a gift for my nephew that I'm playing with before I give it to him.
Absolutely not. It's not. I'm not buying you a toy that I want. That's crazy.
Yeah, I'll have to show you a picture of the remote control Mario Kart that I got for him. Dad and I were playing with it. It's awesome.
That does sound sick, actually. Kids' toys are great,
turns
man.
into a little hover car.
Ooh, okay, that's fun. A little hover car? What? How? Hang on. Now I have questions.
I'll have to send you a video. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
I'll put the video in. Okay, so I should explain. This is sort of our finale. We're going to talk about, I guess, the last episode. We're going to talk about Apple Triad. We're going to sort of, I guess, talk about the theories around this show, Apple Triad. We're going to bring some of the evidence that a Reddit user put together that was like the primary source for people believing that the potential of there being a final episode. Then we'll probably just kind of give our general thoughts on the show as a whole. I want to read through some sections of the book, in particular, probably like the finale, I guess. But structurally, we'll kind of go through what happened historically. We'll talk through the theory. And then I want to sort of hear your thoughts on, for those unaware, Darth is, I guess, lost his mind this week. I don't know how else to explain it. Going into like withdrawal from Sherlock, and has been consuming a tremendous amount of Sherlock adjacent content. I don't know how else to describe it. So I'll be interested to kind of pick through that as well and see your learnings. For the summary, I'm going to reread the section of from the introduction of the manuscript that I think perfectly sets the scene for this. First of all, what did you... this will make more sense if we do the summary, and then I get your thoughts on Apple Tree Yard. Okay, so on a Sunday evening in 2017, hundreds of teens gathered around their television sets, waiting for Call the Midwife to end, waiting for the greatest trick in television to occur, waiting for the final fourth episode of Sherlock to begin. Tumblr exploded with speculation and anticipation. No one quite believed their own theories, but the possibility was irresistible. On face, the theory was ridiculous, really. Just unlikely enough that fans sunk their teeth in. The theory was that the premise of Apple Tree Yard, an adaptation of the novel, was actually a secret Sherlock episode. Reddit users gathered lists of evidence, Tumblr blogs formed theories as to what would happen. All signs pointed to a reveal of our protagonists, John Watson and Sherlock Holmes, were romantically involved and would finally get together. Moriarty would finally return. All of the loose plot threads, half-forgotten character arcs, poorly written episodes would all tie together into a huge, mind-blowing endgame. In the lead-up to that Sunday evening, when questioned about the secret fourth episode, co-creator Stephen Moffat replied, quote, do my Scottish accent again. For heaven's sake, what kind of... Oh, I got bad. I did a really good one last time.
That wasn't bad.
Yeah.
It's just you couldn't keep it up.
But he's kind of like he's like an intellectual, Scott. For heaven's sake, what kind of secrets do you think we're keeping? Let's go home and check. Oh look, episode 4 of the Lost Special. That kind of became Shrek at the end. I was like, I don't know.
I was waiting for you to go, for heaven's sake. I'm giving her all she's got, Captain. There's nothing more. There's no more Sherlock. This is all.
Ogres are like onions. Instead of Sherlock's Lost Special, an adaptation of Apple Tree Yard played on millions of television sets. A mediocre psychological thriller began, and thousands of fans were left heartbroken, devastated. A show they'd invested hundreds of hours in, where they'd crafted dozens of theories, scoured through scenes looking for clues, all in service of a show that was just not very good in the end. This absurd moment in history was the culmination of 7 years of discourse, fan communities, conventions, fan fiction, and theory crafting. 7 years of believing that BBC Sherlock truly was the smartest show, a detective story so clever that even the smallest ambiguity or subtext ought to be a clue. Whether a casual observer or daily fan, the realization that Sherlock was finished, properly finished, settled one question once and for all. The creators weren't penning a brilliant twisting and untwisting story for an amazing metatextual maneuver. They had tried to make a good show and failed. It's easy to view the Apple Tree Yard theory as absurd, a series of teens failing to misunderstand not just how television is made and marketed, but drawing each other further and further into insular communities online. Communities desperate to see themselves represented in the media they consume, that they spent years crafting theories in active defiance of creators and the text itself. The creators calling the theories silly, obnoxious, wrong, embarrassing. And still the fans persisted, right till the seconds ran out on that Sunday evening, and everything changed. So, talk to me about Apple Tree Yard. So, your homework for this episode, because I know you've never seen it, was to watch the pilot episode, or at least the first 10 minutes, just to get that feeling of thinking this was going to be a Sherlock thing, and then kind of consuming it. The forewarning I should give you here is that I don't think this is a very good television show. But what did you think about Apple Tree Yard? Or coming into it off the back of last episode, where you were kind of riding high on Sherlock, and we had a lot of problems with that episode, but I think we both agreed, even though it was kind of a mess, that episode at least was trying to do something that was authentically what the show is about. What was it like coming off the back of that, knowing that we've finished with the show, and then going into Apple Tree Yard? Where was your head at? What did you think of the show? Give me like your general thoughts at a top level.
Well, first off, I wish I had remembered that disclaimer that said at least watch the first 10 minutes, if not the whole thing, because I forced myself to watch the whole entire thing, and boy, do I regret that.
Yeah.
I think that aside from the times when I've been forced to watch sports with my friends, that this was the most bored I have ever been watching a piece of media.
Really?
Like, I think I would have preferred to go back and watch the like high school videos you had to watch about like why does this organism do whatever.
Oh yeah.
Like I could appreciate the cinematography, and I tried to just focus on that to get myself through the episode because it was shot pretty nice. The lighting, the locations, beautiful locations.
Yeah.
The camera work was good. The acting wasn't abhorrent. I could appreciate everything they were doing. I just hated what they were doing. It is I don't know why this story needed to be told, but granted, I've only watched the first episode. I don't want to watch any more.
Darth discovers that romance films are not like romance stories are not for him. Like, yeah, I imagine you would hate this. It's so my bullshit. I actually quite like it. But I knew that you were gonna be like, why does this even exist?
Like some romance movies I have enjoyed, but the way that this one rolls out, I just was not a fan whatsoever. And then the way it ended, and I'm like just like cringing on so many levels. Like I don't understand where the story was trying to go.
Mm-hmm.
But okay, regardless. So then, getting through how much I disliked it, I'm also at the same time thinking, okay, I know this isn't Sherlock because of all of the hints that it's not Sherlock.
Mm-hmm.
So why in this scene or why in this trailer or what about this character made these audience members think, oh, this was going to always have been a Secret Sherlock episode? And for the life of me, like I messaged you and I was like, I just watched the trailer. There is nothing in this, nothing whatsoever that screams. I would have bet like so much money. There are bookies like opening up bets about it's the Sherlock.
Yeah, I would have made so much money on the odds of this not being Sherlock. Like, there's just nothing about it. Like, it's okay. Well, that's not true because we're gonna go through the evidence. There's nothing actually about it in reality. However, as we go through this evidence, I think what we're gonna see is I've got a bit of the historical context, which we'll talk about after we go through this theory, because I don't think debunking the theory is going to take us like all of like 15 or 30 minutes. Like it's not complicated stuff to debunk. But when we get to like the historical context, how disappointed people were in that final episode, they're grasping at anything they can. Like they're like, I can't have wasted 8 years of my life on this. Like it had to be going somewhere. And that tease of Moriarty at the end, I think that finally broke people. Like that was the last kind of straw where you had a bunch of quiet people that were still semi-rational. They were deep in these pipelines or whatever. Semi-rational people finally kind of cracking under the pressure and going, oh no, but like, what if there is something here? Like, what if it is good actually? And there is this because the creators had been saying we're going to do something that no one else in television's ever done, no story's ever done. They kept saying that, and people were like, well, not like a fake TV show that's actually a secret episode would be exactly that. But like that's not how television works. Like there's no way that the BBC would do that. They would just like they would have a bunch of middle-aged people wanting to watch an adaptation of a pretty good romance novel, pretty good romance thriller, turn on and see an episode of Benedict Cumberbatch faffing around on screen. That doesn't make any sense. Like it's so, it just has such a thin relationship with reality that I think we have to take it on face as, I don't think anyone quite believed it. Like no one was like evangelizing like this is what's going to happen, but it was the chance that it could have been true, Darth. Like it was the possibility, this tantalizing possibility of, but what if it, could you imagine if this had been true? And if they had a final episode that was, that justified all of the bad decisions up until that point and threaded them all together, and Moriarty came back and John Locke happened. Like, could you imagine that Berenstein Bears Sliding Doors universe where this was the greatest television show of all time? And there's that possibility in people's minds. Obviously, the possibility is vanishingly small, probably less than 0%. We're talking like a 0.00001% chance, but it's there. And I think it's that allure and the way that the the authorial process has been mythologized by the fandom. Some of the stuff we talked about a lot in season 2 and 3 of this show really comes back to haunt these people, where they have rejected so much of the textual evidence that even the paratext around it, which is the BBC's programming schedule, the things that the creators are saying on Twitter, their responses in interviews, they're ignoring all of that paratext because they're so dedicated to the possibility that it just seems inconceivable to them that they should give up on that chance, I guess, if that makes sense. It's sort of, they're too far in to not at least give it a whirl, I suppose.
The idea is pretty interesting because it shows that they haven't spent a whole lot of time. Granted, I don't know how many people. If this was only like a dozen people on the entire internet, then, you know. However, what I was going to say is I don't know how many people spend a lot of time looking at story crafting and coming after the fact to try to use subsequently provided information to explain everything that came before it in a way that makes everything feel like one whole thing. Like, Disney's been trying to do that with Star Wars to fill all the little holes that they have created, and now they're like, no, you can't hyperspace ram at will. That was just a 1 in a million shot.
Yeah.
You know, you knew that going in. No, we didn't know that going in. There's like all kinds of things like that. They're retroactively trying to fill these holes, and it doesn't work because you shouldn't have to read extra material to understand what you just saw.
Yeah, I shouldn't have to read the visual dictionary of Star Wars The Last Jedi to like understand the stuff happening in the plot, right? Like that seems unnecessary to me.
And like, as a really good example, like one of the things in the visual dictionary that is really, really cool is they have like a cross schematic breakdown of the Radis, so you could see like what the inside of the ship is. And for the aquatic aliens, they have these like water tubes. That's how they get from point A to point B while being able to breathe in the water.
That's
so
right.
like they went this extra length to come up with this stuff that probably on some level was in pre-production. They're like, okay, do we need to build these water tubes? Do we need to show them? But still, that doesn't need to be in the film. It's just like extra little tidbits. It doesn't make or break the film to have that extra stuff, and that's what the supplemental material should be. So if there was this secret fourth episode, it could have just been like the Guardians right now, Guardians of the Galaxy, are doing some special like Christmas special. And as far as I know, it's not supposed to be tied into the universe in any meaningful way. It's just supposed to be, hey, it's Christmas, we're doing something special for audience members around the world, you know, something like that. Like, they could have done something similar to that, and it would have been more believable for it not to be on TV, and it not to be a, you know, it's not a remake of a book. We're not going to label it like that. The audience would have appreciated it, or it would have been more believable had they just said, oh, this is a brand new show that's coming out. It's going to be aired online only.
Yeah.
And it's going to be in the same time slot as Sherlock, and it's going to be starring some of the same actors as Sherlock. Then it makes sense that this could be a secret episode. And if they had done it as a secret episode that was just supplemental material that didn't actually fill in anything but gave you, it left you feeling better, because the end of that one didn't leave you feeling fantastic.
No.
There was
yeah, we talked about how goofy that ending is, and how there's a way it could have been done so much better. Okay, well, let's just kind of work through some of this evidence, because I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised by how much of this sounds plausible, but it's very easy to be like, oh, like you said, these people just don't. They're so detached from the reality of how these things work at this point. So I want to go through the evidence. Then we'll talk about some of the historical context. Then I want to go through some of the sections of the book to try and illuminate, I guess, some of the things that were happening and some of the things that are important to take away, or that I think are important to take away from this process and this project. Before we do that, your like little weird Sherlock bender that you've been on, talk to me about what you've consumed. I know that you finally started watching Elementary, which is very exciting for me because it's one of my favorite shows. Talk to me about...
Yeah, thank you for that,
Yeah.
by the way, because I probably would not have started with that one. But I have adored it so far, and at first I was messaging you because I was disappointed in the introduction, and the way that they did things did not flow together just looking at the cinematography, it didn't flow together nearly as well as I felt like Sherlock did. Like the introduction with John, you like know his character. You know him so much better than you know this version of Watson, and you don't really find out about her in the elementary version. You don't find out about her until like 3/4 of the way through the first episode, and even then, I didn't feel like I had a strong connection to what she was thinking. I knew a little bit about her backstory, but I didn't feel like I connected with her as much as Sherlock made me connect with John. And another thing that I found really interesting was that it seems like and I need to see if there's any more modern renditions of the character. I don't think there are. But it seems like the original version of Holmes was just a really smart dude, right? But the modern versions have all been like this Sheldon type character who is really out there. And I don't know if that's just what our society thinks, that if you're a smart dude, then you're really out there, you're really weird. Like Elementary starts out and Sherlock is like watching like 15 different cartoons on TV for some reason, and then he starts quoting one of the lines to Watson because that's the best way for these two characters to meet, and it doesn't actually tie in that any way that I've seen yet in the first 3 episodes. It doesn't tie into anything
Yet.
Okay, I would be fine if they somehow tie that up to make it, but anyway,
Yeah.
so all of that just starts off feeling like they just want to introduce a off-the-wall character, and that's what Sherlock is supposed to be. And it's somewhat the same in the Robert Downey Jr. version of that character, where he's just super off the wall because smart people have to be weird.
Yeah.
That was my first big take. Was I was really surprised because just from the trailers and the little bit of footage that I've seen, I really expected this version of Sherlock just to be like he's just a smart dude. He's just steadfast, smart dude, solves crimes. You know?
Yeah.
So I was kind of surprised about that.
They do tone him down as the show goes on, I guess. The idea of that show is really that Joan Watson centers him a little bit and brings him back to normal, and he brings her out of normal a little bit. And as the show goes on, they both grow and change, and he becomes a bit more centered, and she becomes a bit weirder. One thing that's interesting, I mean, that comes back to that book that that I was referencing a lot in season 1 by Dr. Royne, where, you know, that special detective, or that sort of like the emergence of the CBS procedural off the back of Monk, where it's like the main detective is kind of a weirdo. He has some weird quirk, right? We talked about House MD. We talked about Elementary, of course, Monk, The Mentalist, right? These shows that center somebody who kind of sits outside of society, and usually sits outside of the power structures as well, right? Like one of the key things about a lot of those shows, with House MD being the rare exception, is, you know, those I suppose that's because it's not a police procedural, but those characters never work for the police. They're always consultants, so they have some special relationship, right?
Psych.
Exactly. Yeah, psych. Exactly. Like they can't be a part of this standard apparatus. They have to sort of be removed from the hierarchical power structure, because someone like that could never be institutionalized. And Royne's book, Dr. Royne's book, talks through that process of like, well, what does institutionalization mean in the context of when you have a Sherlock out there in the world, or you have Patrick Jane, you know, these characters who are so extreme and extraordinary. What does that, by contrast, mean for the structures over the top of them, like the police force or the law and things like that, and the way that changes the operations of a universe, like fundamentally, like that changes the world building of that universe. One of the things Sherlock tries to do is have its cake and eat it too in that stuff, where, you know, we talked about a cold open. I think it was the episode of John's wedding. The cold open in that, where Lestrade keeps catching these bad guys, but they can't seem to nail them down in court, right? And then you think about all of the ways that Sherlock has solved crimes and how none of that would really hold up in a courtroom, right? And suddenly you have these two things that don't cohere together. And I think it's an interesting observation that Elementary, as it goes on, becomes a lot more invested in how does this world function around Sherlock, and what does it mean for him to exist within it, especially as you get into some of his backstory and that sort of thing. And one of the maneuvers that show does really well is it sets itself after the kind of heyday of Sherlock, when he's in London with Lestrade doing all of these fantastical things. This is like a washed up Sherlock on the back of, a drug addiction. And so he's already done all of the fantastic stuff, and now it's the aftermath of that. And there's a way in which they end up kind of divesting themselves of, like, over time, hey, he's a super secret special detective, and it becomes a lot more, he's a guy who asks the right people for help at the right times and knows the right things to look for. And that slowly kind of happens as the kind of implications for the legal system and the police force and the world kind of fall into place around that. And they managed to get that coherence going really, really well by sort of season 3. Whereas I think a lot of the other shows just never really bother. With the rare exception, I think, of The Mentalist, where that gets to pull some pretty incredible maneuvers that I don't think, to that quote before that's Stephen Moffat saying, oh, we're going to do things a story's never done. The Mentalist actually gets to do that in its sort of 2 penultimate seasons, where, for those unfamiliar, I think I've referenced this before. So Patrick Jane is the main character. His family is killed by a serial killer, Red John, and he sort of joins the CBI, which is like the California Bureau of Investigations, with this aim to work with the police long enough to find this guy to get revenge. He's going to kill this guy for revenge. And the story is about his relationship with the police force and with morality and with justice. And, is that is killing this guy the right thing to do? And they get to pull a maneuver where all of that gets resolved. And then you get a full season and a half of television dealing with the wake of that resolution. And it really is a maneuver that no other show has been able to do. And they do it incredibly well. And so to I guess, circle back to your thought there, or your question around, like, why is this happening? I think it's very much of the era. And the shows that get to kind of work through that, tone it back a little bit, and then they find their rhythm quite steadily. Whereas, others that don't manage to do that, you'll find just end up, like, not working and become unwatchable, and then eventually get canceled, that sort of thing. But it's an interesting kind of artifact of that time, I suppose, in television.
There's an interesting thought that I had when you were describing them as being outside the system, and it's very much tied into the mythos of superheroes, because superheroes almost never are part of the actual police force. They're always outside of the law, and that's usually part of their struggle, is how much can they do outside of the law? Should they be bound to the law or not? And I wonder if part of that is tying together with these detective shows, and in the back of our minds we're thinking, oh, they're Superman, they're Batman, yeah. They're outside the law while they're doing all this stuff.
I think that's a really good point. That's definitely the way the modern framing works anyway. They are like the super person in the show, right? Which is interesting. You made me think of something, and now it's gone. The other thing I was thinking about is, like, to your question of, like, why are they all like this? It's kind of because the original Sherlock Holmes was a bit like this. He was super weird. Like, he wasn't off the wall in the same way, but he was a weird guy. Like, he's, the opening scene with him, he's like trying to test different chemicals to try and understand how blood clots over a series of days, and if there's a way that you can reverse engineer that. And Watson's like, why are you doing that? No one cares about that. And there's a way in which all of these things are based on the original Sherlock, and there's sort of a cyclical or a rhyming nature of the fact that, these detective stories form the foundation for the way that detective fiction is written, then the way that television is made, and then you get all of these kind of, you get Monk and you get Psych, and then you get Sherlock. And there's a way in which kind of it ends up refracting off of itself, and the version of Sherlock that we get in this show is kind of built on the residue of all of the other attempts at replicating and doing the same thing, and it just sort of like ping pongs between itself and kind of grows and grows, which is super interesting, and it's definitely like something that I would like to probably, if I ever do a follow-up book, that's probably something I'd love to investigate, because I think even when you watch Sherlock through the eras of, like, the films and the television programs, and the movies, and then the modern adaptations and things like that, you can see a progression from really, like, steadfast, kind of quippy, but, like, very straight up and down, pretty similar to what we saw in the Abominable Bride episode, all the way up to the kind of comical, versions we see in the cartoons, right, where he's like a super crazy genius guy. And there's something curious about that progression, where it's not just Sherlock once, Sherlock again, and he's getting slightly different with the times. It's Sherlock, a bunch of other stuff, and then they build a Sherlock out on top of that. And there's probably a way in which that sort of ends up being cyclical. So I guess without further ado, let's get into the theory. So this comes from Beelzebub3 on Reddit. It's an incredibly famous Reddit post. And this was 6 years ago. So this was in the interlude after the finale, before Apple Tree Yard had come out. So I'm going to read these. I've chunked them. This was a numbered list when it was originally presented. So we'll just kind of use the numbers that Beelzebub has put together for us. So the first piece of evidence, number one, the most obvious one, quote, "People always give up after 3." So that's a quote from the second episode of season 4, where Sherlock is referring to the recording devices that are sort of around the hospital room with Culverton Smith. And so people point to people always give up after 3, and that's why the show is called Give Up After 3. Which you were the look on your face in that episode when you realized that was why I had called it that was priceless, and will live in my head forever as an absolute treat. This one's pretty obvious. It's just a cool thing to say. It's just a cool thing to say, and there's a bunch of research around this that it's just 3 is a number that lets a human recognize a pattern. It's the minimum number of things you need for pattern recognition, and so people often give up after 3 because when we get a pattern, we feel satisfied. That's why we like trilogies, right? It's a thing that just makes us, we can see a pattern. It's got closure. That's why stories used to be in 3 acts. There's nothing more to it than that. People are just human pattern recognition machines.
I think I actually remember writing that down when I was doing YouTube research, and how many additional videos can you put in your recommended before people will stop even trying to click on one of them. And it's if you put one recommended video, there's a 70% chance they'll click on it. If you put 2, there's now a 50% chance they'll click on either one. If you put 3, then there's 25% chance. If you put 4, there's a 0% chance that they'll click anything, because 4 is too many options for most people's brains to deal with. Yeah. So 3 or less, you've got a shot, but everyone gives up after 3, which was just fascinating.
Yeah, isn't it? So that's just nothing. That's not really evidence. The second point is writer Stephen Moffat. So I cannot, to this day, find a source for this quote. So take this with all of the grains of salt. It also disproves the fact. Anyway, whatever. Evidence number 2. Writer Stephen Moffat, also he's a co-creator, not just a writer, but whatever, was asked about the 4th hidden episode in a recent interview, in which he responded, quote, "It doesn't reflect the fact there's going to be a 4th episode. For heaven's sake, what kind of secrets do you think we're keeping? Let's go home and check. Oh, look, episode 4, The Lost Special." That's the quote that I've included in the summary there. The Lost Special, so this is interesting. The Lost Special is a short story written by Sherlock Holmes creator Arthur Conan Doyle several years after The Final Problem, which is widely known as a Sherlock story, even though the main character's name is never revealed. So I've read The Lost Special, and yeah, it's pretty obviously a Sherlock short story, but he hadn't committed to bringing Sherlock back yet because he hadn't really had that negotiation with the publishers and that sort of thing. But so you can see you can see that, and this is where it's interesting, right? So you can see that this happened, Doyle did this maneuver in fiction. So you know how before I was saying one of the pieces of evidence is the writers are always saying we're gonna do something no story's ever done, we're gonna do something television's never done before. If they did this, they're just doing what Doyle did, so it wouldn't be new anyway. So I think that's interesting.
I'm curious what they think they did that was so groundbreaking.
I have no idea. To this day, I have no idea. I'm assuming it's the secret dog that he forgot about that turned out to, and then his secret sister, and then the dog turned out to actually be his secret best friend. Because no one's ever done that because it's fucking stupid. And that could be that could be it. I don't know. Could be that.
I mean, they could argue that literal exact storyline has never been done before, so thus they didn't lie.
It's true. And there's probably a really good reason why no one's done that literal exact storyline before. Evidence stuff, yeah. So that one kind of credible. Doesn't mesh with some of the other stuff the creators have said, but that one, yeah, credible. Doyle did do that. Could be an interesting maneuver to replicate that. So this is where we get into Apple Triad. So evidence number 3. A new 5-episode series called Apple Triad will take the Sherlock slot this Sunday on BBC. The 2 main actors are called Ben Chaplin and Emily Watson. This is where things are going to get tinfoil hat-like, but stay with me. The funniest thing about this is Ben Chaplin and Emily Watson. It turns out people just have the last name Watson. It's also not the Harry Potter Emma Watson, not to be confused. He'll explain the Ben bit of Ben Chaplin in a minute. Evidence number... Yeah, so again, that's not anything. It takes the time slot because that's how television works. Point number 4. The entire cast of this 5-episode series are only 26 people. And looking at these actors' role, it seems most of them are just extras. Go to IMDb and see for yourself. Seems off. It's a 5-episode series and there's only 20... What? Like... This is where I start to go, do you just not... That's not how television works. Also, it's not out yet, so the IMDb listings won't be complete. Like, we all kind of know that. Like, it takes like, you know, when the film comes out and they publish all the press packets, the IMDb pages get immediately more accurate because they release that final information. Because until the thing is out, you don't know if, you know, if 2 of your extras are getting cut out in the edit. So you wouldn't necessarily have an accurate listing. Also, this is fucking funny. Evidence number 5. One of these actors is called Richard Rycroft. And he plays someone called MP. MP is an abbreviation of Member of Parliament, which we all know Mycroft Holmes is connected to. This actor's profile picture is not available on IMDb. Richard Rycroft. Mycroft Holmes. Do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do. Like, you know what I mean? It's you could see someone reading that being like, yes. Turns out Richard Rycroft played an MP in the show. Go figure. That one, not credible, but pretty fun. Richard Rycroft, Mycroft Holmes. Yeah, okay. 6, if you look under the writers section of Apple Triad on IMDb, there are 2 writers listed, but they're both listed for only writing 1 episode. Usually it says how many writers there are and how many episodes they've written, but I guess there's only been 1 single episode written out of these 5. Weird. Like, IMDb's just a shit website. Like, you probably just were reading it wrong. I don't know. That's nothing. This one gets me because, so for those who don't know, Apple Triad's a book. So this next one is just point number 7. Looking at the plot of Apple Triad, it's about a woman named Yvonne Carmichael who lives with 2 grown-up children and starts seeing a stranger. Remember Lady Carmichael from The Abominable Bride, who also had 2 children? Yeah, because they were referencing the book. Like, this is where I'm like, they were clearly referencing the story because it was the same kind of, like, what do you mean? That's just this show. That's the show being clever. Like, that's a Moffat moment, and you're like, evidence. So far, how are you thinking? Are you buying into the theory, or are we not believing it yet? What are you thinking?
Well, so far this is like the people who are trying to convince you that Earth is a donut and there's, you know, Tyrannosaurus running around inside the donut kind of stuff.
Yeah. Accurate.
Now, you can get some credible arguments, but for the most part, they're all loonies. So that's the vibe that I'm getting from this. And my biggest curiosity is how many people believed this, which is different than how many people hoped it was true.
Yeah, that's a harder metric. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny you mention the flat earthers because I've got a bit of that in the historical context here, and I guess how all this stuff works. So
I talk about it all the time at work, by the way, because it annoys the stew out of everyone there. Because it is the funnest thing to me, because none of them can prove that the Earth is round, but they hate me suggesting that it might be flat, because it goes against everything they were taught in school. Yet they can't prove it's round. It's fascinating to me. Absolutely fascinating.
That is one of those things where it's like, if you just do a bit of Googling, it's really easy to prove. Like, you can just do it with a camera. You just need a clear enough day. It's not that hard. But my favorite thing about it is, we'll talk about it. Sorry, I did do some research on that, which I'll bring to bear. If you guys haven't seen it, and I'm going to reference it, you should definitely watch the the flat Earth video by Folding Ideas. It's absolutely brilliant. Okay, so point number 8. Why would BBC put this really unknown series at the absolute best TV slot in London to replace Sherlock? There's been almost no promotion of it. I mean, yeah, okay.
That kind of clues you in that it's not a Sherlock show. That's why
That's
they're
why
not
they're not
promoting it.
Yeah, because they don't know if it's going to be a hit yet, right? Oh, Jesus. Yeah.
It's also like how they're not promoting the Olympics when it's not an Olympics year. It's like,
you're like,
you don't promote
'cause it's
stuff
not
that
on.
isn't real.
Yeah, they're not running ads for the Olympics because the Olympics aren't on television right now.
They were so close they had the evidence in their hands and they didn't know what to do with it.
God, this one's good. Because speaks to something you called out at the start. Number 9. If you look at the launch trailer of Apple Tree Yard, doesn't it remind you of an episode of Sherlock? The way it's shot visually, the environment, and the whole atmosphere seems similar, doesn't it? I could definitely see this being a Sherlock episode where the woman seeks John Locke's help. I hate to be this guy, but it looks similar because it's set in London. Yeah, credibly, it's shot in a similar style, but that's like the BBC's budget gives them an in-house style, right? Like, I think you called it out. Like, it doesn't really feel like Sherlock, though. It doesn't have any of the energy. It doesn't have any of the music. Like, it doesn't... Yeah, there's nothing about it. When I saw those trailers, I didn't then sort of, immediately jump to that. Number 10, this one is extremely far-fetched, but the 2 writers I mentioned earlier are Amanda Coe and Louise Doughty. Louise Brayley plays Molly in Sherlock, and Amanda Abington plays Mary. That is extremely far-fetched. You're not wrong. The fact that Amanda Coe is one of the writers, and Amanda Abington is one of the actors, and the fact that Louise Doughty is one of the writers and Louise Brayley is one of the actors. Like, people just have the same first name, guy. Like, that's a very, very, very common names.
I feel like this is the same energy as like middle school and young high school guys when they're like, do you think she likes me because she looked over at me and like shot me the bird? You think that
Is that
is that a signal? Does she actually
She hasn't looked. She's never spoken to me. I think that means she must be in love with me. Yeah. I know she's dating the
So this show
high school quarterback.
This show has nothing to do with this has nothing to do with Sherlock whatsoever. I bet that means that it's actually Sherlock.
I think that means all signs point to it being Sherlock.
I hate that I'm laughing at like the immaturity of the people who thought this, but I mean we've all been there. Just like laugh at yourself and move on.
It's fine. I mean... We'll do the empathy thing. We'll do the empathy thing afterwards. Where it's in my notes. We will do it. But this is also just funny as fuck.
Okay, laugh now, moment of silence later.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Number 11, the BBC haven't released a program schedule for Sunday the 29th. I tried to look into this. I think they just released it late. Like, there's nothing I could find that made this credible. Number 12, if you go to the launch trailer on YouTube, there's an official link below the video which directs you to the official BBC site for Apple Tree Yard. It says 404, page not found, and there's a picture of a clown. So... 404, season 4, episode 4. Or it's possible that 404 is the universal error code for not found. It's possible. It's possible that it probably is. It's possible that that's been around since ES1, possibly, or it's Sherlock season 4, episode 4. So I think, what'd you think about that?
If they had said like it was error code like 303, I would have been like, say what? Like, I mean,
303 is a valid error code, but
yeah, it's just you never see it. Like you only pretty much ever see 404.
But that would be even more confusing because isn't 303 like like see other or like look elsewhere, like check reference or something? Like wouldn't that?
I don't know. I don't work in code like you do,
Okay.
but it still was granted, everyone doesn't know this stuff, so them seeing that they could easily have
I get
inferred, but still, it's still.
Yeah. There was a picture of a clown. Did you like precog this, like, or something? Like, what happened? Did you know?
That is. I mean, sometimes when a site won't load, you see that code come up. Sometimes you'll see images.
Yeah, well, you can redirect.
But
You can basically have your 404 redirect to like a landing page that you can brand up and stuff. It's a pretty common practice.
I also don't know how the clown relates to Sherlock, aside from the fact that there was a clown in the last episode. But that's really
Sounds like
tenuous.
sounds like
I mean,
evidence to me, Darth. Uh, this one's good. There was number 13. There was a big apple tree on John Watson's wallpaper in his baby's room. Arwell Wynne Jones, who is the production designer of Sherlock, has said, quote, "It's all about the wallpaper." I looked into that quote, and Arwen Wynne Jones was responding to a question of how do you make all of these spaces feel coherent? To which she responds, "It's all about the wallpaper." She wasn't like giving you a clue about the secret. She was describing her set design.
yeah.
But, you know, there is a big apple tree, so okay, I guess. Number 4.
The bigger question I have
Yeah.
is how no one has brought up the fact that they would have had to like legally buy the copyright for the name that they were stealing from this existing book
Yeah, I know.
to make this fake episode of Sherlock, and no one is like,
That seems like an expensive
Yeah.
way to do it. Because
Yeah.
you would just make
So
up
it's-
a show, surely. You wouldn't use it based on an existing IP, right?
yeah. I mean, films do this like all the time. Like, it is an extremely common practice. Like, when they're filming the next Star Wars, they're gonna call it Busty Bunny #2.
Yeah.
Like, they make up weird names that have nothing to do with the actual franchise, and they'll even put those names on the caps on the T-shirts. And so everyone will be out filming Ski Lodge 47 when it's actually a Star Trek movie,
Yeah.
because they want to have fake names so people can't track them, and so the fans won't go and mob the set while they're trying to shoot. Plus, half the time they might not even figure out the name until they already start filming, because that's what Abrams likes to do.
Yeah. Got him. Got him. You know how that all started, right? Which is the original Star Wars and the whole Blue Harvest story. You know that all originates from Star Wars. Because
Really?
yeah,
No, I did not know that.
because the original name for A New Hope was Blue Harvest, because that was what it was originally going to be called. And they put that was all the branding and all the hats they wore. That was how it was referenced in all the scripts and things like that. Because Lucas hadn't really picked a name yet, and he didn't want people to know that he was working on like a Flash Gordon style serial, because he was afraid it would ruin the marketing opportunities around it. And then that just sort of started the whole thing of like, you give it a placeholder name that misleads people. And yeah, it all started with A New Hope. So there you go.
Cool.
Yeah. That's my fun fact for today.
Yeah. Teaching me stuff about Star Wars.
Boom.
It feels good.
Only time I can ever do it. Let's go. That's the one time. Fucking, I can never remember the names of anything. I'm excited for that supercut to come out of me just constantly forgetting Star Wars names, because they're all absolutely absurd. I don't know why I cannot hold the names of those films in my head to save my life. Okay, number 14, Emily Watson, the main actor from Apple Tree Yard, said that her co-star Ben was banned from filming sex scenes in the House of Commons. Mycroft's orders, perhaps a joke / hint about something that happens in the episode.
Or
Or the House of Commons found out they filmed a sex scene in it and went, "Could you not do that again, please? We didn't give you permission." Which is what happened. So
taxes pay for a lot of stuff, but taxes aren't paying for this.
And to be fair, it's a pretty well done sex scene, but it's possible that that's what really happened. The show ends up getting kind of raunchy toward the end. It's pretty interesting. Anyway, that one's very good. Number 15, there's still only one trailer, and it only features 3 actors. Strange for a primetime series. That's because they don't know if it's going to be a hit yet. Okay. Number 16, an Italian or Polish, I'm not sure, website dealing with file sharing has found pictures of 4 episodes where the last one is called The New Friend. Now, I don't speak Italian and Google Translate isn't very good, so I can't tell for sure what this article says, but you can find it here. It's just like a mistranslation. Turns out this one's just a mistranslation. It has nothing to do with a final episode of Sherlock. That's fine. So we're just going to move on. I don't want to get into that one too much because a bunch of other people have debunked that. So then there's an edit, and he comes in and adds some more clues that people have pointed out in the threads below. So number 17. The New Friend is the first chapter in a Sherlock novel called A Study in Emerald, written by Neil Gaiman, who has Gaiman written for on 3 separate occasions, Stephen Moffat. Now, this starts to sound credible. If you're unaware of the fact that Neil Gaiman wrote A Study in Emerald a really long time before before he started writing for Stephen Moffat. It was like just off the back of his comic book days, and he wrote it because he's always loved detective stories. But he's not wrong. Gaiman has written for Moffat on 3 episodes of Doctor Who at that point. I think he's done 1 more in the time since. That, to me, is like the most credible piece of evidence that perhaps Gaiman helped write the secret 4th episode. If you were going to do this kind of maneuver, you would probably get one of the best writers alive. You would probably try and get Gaiman to help you. So this, to me, just at an industry level, kind of makes sense. If that's probably like a bit credible to me. If you don't have the background knowledge of Gaiman and Moffat's relationship and how it's sort of not adversarial, but you can tell that Moffat is incredibly. He kind of wishes he was Gaiman. He wants to have that prestige. He wants to be that kind of writer, but he's just not. And you can feel a way in which this feels credible to me that he might get in this big gun of the industry. So that's interesting to me. Have you read any of Gaiman's stuff? Any of his books or his comics or anything?
I'm not sure I've ever heard the name, but that doesn't mean I haven't seen something that... I mean, I'm sure I've seen the Doctor Who episodes.
Yeah. He did the one where the TARDIS becomes a woman. Remember that?
Oh, yeah. When they land on the TARDIS-eating planet,
Yeah.
and they suck the soul out of the
Yeah.
TARDIS because you have to do that before you could eat it for some stupid
Yeah,
reason.
because sci-fi bullshit. It's a fucking awesome,
Yeah.
fucking awesome episode.
I mean, I like the idea. It's just it's one of those shows where if you stop to think about it,
if you say it out loud, you shouldn't. It just you should never do that. I'm trying to think what else he did on Doctor Who. Let me see. I should know this. I've pretty much committed like Neil Gaiman's entire work history to my brain. I mean, he's most known for originally he did the Sandman comic books, which are absolutely phenomenal. Just trying to see what the episodes were. He did Coraline, if you've seen that film, Stardust, a bunch of other stuff.
Stardust.
Yeah.
I love that film.
Yeah.
It was really underappreciated, I think.
The book's fucking brilliant as well. I would say the book's even better. Yes, he did The Doctor's Wife. And he did Nightmare in Silver, which was that episode where it's on like an amusement park on the moon and the Cybermen invade, and the Doctor kind of has like a mind battle.
Gets turned into a yeah. It was like a chess thing, but not really.
Yeah, they're playing chess, but it's like a metaphor. I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Neil Gaiman's incredible. Have you watched this? They've done a Sandman adaptation on Netflix recently, and it's absolutely incredible.
I've wanted to watch it because you've raved about it, but I've never known anything about that character remotely, so it didn't pique my interest from that that perspective.
Yeah. All to say, this is the first and nearly one of the last pieces of evidence that, to me at the time, seemed credible, because I knew their relationship. Right, they hadn't sort of had their, they hadn't yet in the industry been divided by like public opinion yet. Like people haven't yet put Moffat into the bucket he's in now, and they hadn't yet elevated Gaiman to the prestige that he has. So I could kind of see it at the time. In retrospect, laughable, but at the time it did seem plausible.
Well, the problem is it came on top of all of the other stuff. Like if all of the other stuff wasn't there, it would have had more credibility. But once you start looking at everything else that we've laughed at so far, it's like it's a coincidence.
Yeah.
Like it has to be a coincidence because of all the other stuff.
Because of everything else. Yes.
Yeah. And it's like you were talking about the sex scenes in the first episode, and I'm sitting here, I cannot get the image out of my head of the first time they go into like the locked section of whatever building that is, a huge ancient historical site that's like kept locked up, and they're probably renovating it or something, and then they like go in a closet and start having sex, and in my brain now I'm like, Sherlock whips open the door and he's like, excuse me, do you know where the coffee is? coffee. I need coffee. Where's the coffee? Like, that is exactly like what would have happened if this was a secret Sherlock episode. And so part of my brain, I'm thinking like, that could have worked.
There's
But
there's a lot of moments in this show where that could have happened, and it didn't because it's an adaptation of Apple Tree Yard. Number 18, there's been some information added on BBC about Apple Tree Yard. What does it say? Quote, Dr. Yvonne Carmichael seems to have it all. A respected career, a beautiful home, and family. However, nothing is ever as easy as it appears, and when she receives an unexpected proposition from an enigmatic stranger, Yvonne is shocked by the passion he awakens in her. But gradually, she begins to realize there is much more to her lover than meets the eye, and she could be playing a very dangerous game indeed. Quote. That last line sounds awfully familiar, let alone the whole description. The game is afoot, Darth. The game is afoot. Number 19, Apple Tree Yard is listed on IMDb as having 5 episodes, yet you go into further detail, it says there are 4 episodes. Perhaps the first episode is in fact the final Sherlock episode, and the real Apple Tree Yard starts on the 29th. Or the IMDb is just still inaccurate because the show isn't out yet. Is probably the case. Also, IMDb is such a terrible website that you're probably looking in the wrong place. That's a lot of the explanations for these, is like that website sucks. 20, oh my god. This one is number 20, the date this Sunday where it might all go down, the 1st of the 22nd. 122B. Which is not, it's 221. It doesn't, okay. I mean, really doing the red string at this point. 21, so this one. This is the one that I've been kind of hammering on the whole time. 21, we've been promised a, quote, rug pull, and something that's never happened before by both the creators and the actors. I watched a lot of, as part of the research for last episode, and this one, I watched a lot of the interviews with the actors at the time, with Moffat and the executive producers, and like they do keep saying stuff like this in the lead up to season 4. What they are referring to is obviously the Euros reveal, which they think is the best twist ever done in television. But people are like, well, it wasn't that good, so they must have meant something else. So that's where the introduction comes from of the show that we're doing, which is like they use all of this to try and explain why the show is bad on purpose, rather than going, the creators thought this was the best thing since sliced bread. And it just like turns out that it wasn't. They just tried to do something really cool and failed. And it's just kind of unfortunate.
It's one of the best examples of why you should always under-promise and over-deliver. Because people will get such, they'll have this built up in their head of what they think it's supposed to be, and if it's not to that level, then they're like, oh, there must be something else. I must be missing something.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so why did people believe this, right? So I want to talk you through, I guess, some of the conclusions I've come to working through this show with you, working through writing this book. I want to kind of just sort of lay out the way that I see it, and then kind of get your thoughts on it as we go through. So, I mean, I think there's lots of different reasons. I think the big ones here are the kind of top 3 that I see them is the queer baiting, the misdirection, and the missignaling. And that missignaling is that deliberate stuff in the paratextual space. That's the creators saying, we're going to do this rug pull. That's the creators on Twitter quoting the show at different points in time. That's also the paratext of Tumblr and Reddit and things like that. I think at a baseline, the readerly engagement, the mode of readerly engagement becomes taking these paratextual nods and then committing to antagonistic readings of the text, which, as we've alluded to before, an antagonistic reading isn't that you dislike the text, it's that you reject the text's own conclusions about its meaning, or you reject the evidence in the text. And so what's happening is, with each reading of the text, these readers pick up on new paratextual evidence or nods, or they're told certain things are nods or evidence, and then they layer them onto the previous meta. And so each passing of the text, they actually get further away from what the text is. And that's kind of what you were saying before. It's like, when you get up to evidence number 19, by itself 19, you're like, yeah, that's credible, but you look back at the stack that they've built it on top of, and you can kind of see it for the absurdity it is. And I guess the one thing I do want to call out from an empathy perspective, and we'll get to sort of the proper meat and potatoes of it in a second, is this becomes like a self-perpetuating mechanism because the authors keep saying there's going to be more to see, there's going to be another rug pull. And so they're sort of, in order to market this to normal people, they're inadvertently encouraging these users to distance themselves from the text and encourage them to keep rereading the text. You know, like it sort of becomes this perpetuating mechanism. And I guess the other way, the other crucial component here is that readers in this mode at this time adapt their theories to the text dismissal of their theories. We talked about it at the time, but you recall in season 3, they basically make fun of these people in the show, where they basically say like, hey, don't try and work out how Sherlock survived. We know the answers. It's our show, not yours, right? But instead of taking it for what it was, which is a very patronizing response to the fan base, they read it as, they're just trying to throw us off the scent, right? Even the show itself saying, hey, this is ridiculous, they take that to be evidence. Everything that is brought in that disproves their theory becomes evidence for that theory. The other one that I've harped on that I think is inexcusable from the creators is Moriarty being 100% dead. They think is a red herring because the show itself is constantly teasing his return. Now, we talked about it last episode. I think we both agree that his return in the recorded messages and whatever, and Euros being his revenge, we can agree that that's what the show means by his return, right? I think we both came to that conclusion. Like, he's dead. He's not actually coming back. That was sort of what the show is trying to do, is set up, you know, the East Wind's coming or whatever. I'm back or whatever. It's sort of his posthumous revenge.
You could possibly argue that all of that was building up towards him coming back in season 5, but as of right now, yes, I would agree with that.
Yeah. And so the problem, of course, is that for all these metas to work and for a reader to believe a 4th episode is coming, they have to constantly actively reject the text itself. Constantly. Every time something happens, every time there's evidence against what they believe, they have to work it through, and then they sublimate it into the existing theory, so the existing metas. I love this quote from Tim Minchin because I think this really summarizes what's happening here. This is from Storm, which is a poem he wrote. So, quote, "Science adjusts its views based on what's observed. Faith is the denial of observation so that belief can be preserved." It's this idea that science, when we say science in this case, assume we mean textual analysis, assume we mean this project that we've undertaken, assume we mean rationally approaching something as it exists. Science adjusts its views based on what's observed. You know, when we learn something is different than we previously believed, science adapts and adjusts. Faith is the denial of observation so that belief can be preserved. Sometimes you'll hear this argument from evangelical folks who will say that, people's faith in science is just as blind as someone's, belief in God or belief in naturopathy or whatever it is, which is just like a fundamental misunderstanding of how science functions, right? They'll often say, 100 years ago we thought this thing was the case and now we're wrong. How can you believe science? And it's like, no, that's the mechanism of science. Is it will adjust itself based on what's observed and proved, and they conflate that to faith because I guess in their minds, people who are agnostic, atheists, whatever, non-religious folk, in their mind, the mechanism by which those people have constructed their views is the same mechanism by which they have constructed their views, which is a denial of observation so that they can believe stuff, right? If you believe, let's say that you believe the Old Testament is 100% true. In order to do that, you have to actively deny things that you observe on a daily basis to preserve your belief in that fact. And in the context of, say, this show and these fans, in my opinion, I think these readers were not incorrect to imagine a 4th, final, actually good episode, because the text is so disingenuous and self-deflationary that to me, it feels predestined to let their audience down in this way, right? Like, it attracted a disenfranchised, isolated, internet-centric group of queer teens, and it's this deeply, richly disappointing exercise to see this community disintegrate as the show comes to a conclusion, because they just want to be represented, they just want to be seen in this space, and they believed so hard that it was possible. You know, the fans weren't just pissed. I want to be clear. They were like faithless. This is like realizing that God isn't real, or that one day you're going to die, right? Like, it creates an absence. It's not just a funny thing on the internet where they go, oh, okay. You know, like the thing I've written in my notes here. Okay, I've already said, I didn't realize I wrote this down. This is the equivalent of realizing God isn't real, or that Trump was a hapless sex pest. You know, these things, when you realize them, they fundamentally change you forever. They are life-changing events. And in the space they're in, these are life-changing events at a really delicate time with people who feel like they're not part of society. And that's really scary. I want to talk about Flat Earth in a second, because I think there's a mechanism that's happening there and in QAnon that's very, very similar, that kind of explains how this happens. Robert Evans talks about it a lot in his books, where he talks about the radicalization of terrorists on Reddit and online and places like that, and how that stuff happens. But I guess, yeah, I want to really like emphasize, I understand how these people got there, and I understand how traumatic it is to come out of that. And why they held on to the very last second to see if this was true. Like, I get it. Yeah. So, okay, we'll talk a little bit about Dan Olson's video on Flat Earth in a second. Do you have any general thoughts, I guess, coming off the back of that self-perpetuating loop? I know that you see that a lot in Star Wars and things like that. Is there anything that you've learned from the communities that you're a part of that can help people who might be in these spaces, or anything you would say to sort of people who know people like this? Like, because you've seen a lot of those spaces where, you know, the people have this opinion about The Last Jedi, that, you know, whatever all these things are. How do you see people kind of come out of that, or you know, what are your thoughts on that, having kind of been adjacent to those spaces?
The first thought I had was, this is all so similar to stuff that I've talked about many times, which is pulling from an audiobook that Dr. Dalton Kehoe did, which was effective communication skills, primarily talking about the workplace. Our owner actually bought all of us a copy and had us listen to it like we took, it was actually 12 hours. Mm-hmm. This audiobook was 12 hours long, and he gave us 12 hours of work time to listen to this audiobook because it was so helpful. And one of the things that Dr. Kehoe talked about was how your brain will actually shut down in order to protect you, because your self-identity is like so vital to being able to continue living. And if what you believe to be true turns out not to be true, you like physically break down. It's incredibly interesting. And that's why we see these things across all of these different franchises, is people trying to maintain that homeostasis internally in you know, their psyche, and they probably don't know that they're doing it, but they see Sherlock as a brilliant show, and they identify as an intelligent person who watches this intelligent show. So if the show turns out not to be intelligent, they are not intelligent, and their brain shuts off. They're like, they did like MRI scans of people's brains, and they presented them with information that they disagreed with, and you could see in like the scans that their brains literally turned off and would not accept this information that they did not agree with as a method of preserving that internal psyche. So we're seeing this with, you know, Doctor Who in those episodes that people hated, with Star Wars in the episodes that people hated. Like, people will just refuse to acknowledge that those things exist, because they can't be a Star Wars fan and acknowledge that this terrible thing exists. They can't look at that episode of Doctor Who and say they did what to, this child is our hero. No, it can't be. That doesn't exist anymore. I have to ignore it. I can't be a fan and acknowledge that exists. So, and the realization that happens is really the primary way that we can move on from it. Because that's really the crux of this is people don't understand that this is what is happening, and therefore they could never let go and move on and grow, because there are still people. The Last Jedi came out in 2017, and people are still angrily talking about it on message boards to this day, breaking down parts of the movie that are bad so that they could vindicate their internal hate of the film, because that's who they are. And if you could just understand why you are feeling what you are feeling, then you could stop wasting all of your time on something that is not helping you in the long run. And that's not just in movies and stuff. It can be, you're pining after someone that you used to date, and you spend all this time thinking about them, and then all of a sudden you realize, oh, this is why I was thinking about them. Now you could move past that and grow. So that's really my biggest takeaway from this whole conversation, is the fact that I wish that psychology was kind of talked about more, in order to, because it's these shows are introducing problems in society, and they introduced trauma in these kids' lives over this show, and there's no way for these kids to understand what is happening to them. They don't know why they are having these reactions, and they're gonna grow up with this chip on their shoulder because of this show.
Yeah,
it's not just Sherlock, other shows too, but it's anyway.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. I mean, to summarize, go to therapy. I want to dig into this a little bit, because I think I've talked about this a little bit on the show before. I think it's really easy to point at these people and laugh, and because some of the shit they say is funny. It's really easy to do that. I think the really hard exercise, especially if you know people like this in your life, the really hard exercise is empathizing with them. In Dan Olson's YouTube video, In Search of a Flat Earth, which is an absolutely brilliant essay, he describes the self-perpetuating mechanism of QAnon, where these kinds of deep in-groups attract and encourage people who are already predisposed to these kinds of behaviors, and they kind of enable them to radicalize it further. Unlike a doomsday cult like QAnon, though, a lot of John Locke diehards were, they're desperate for representation of their own meta or their own queerness in a mainstream BBC show. But what you end up with is this messy, awkward, aggressive cluster of fans who, kind of to this day, a lot of them remain staunch in their antagonistic reading of the text. And some of these weren't kids at the time. One of the most famous blogs I've been citing, the woman running it at the time was 40. These are people who are out there in the world living with these modes of user engagement with different parts of reality. But the text itself, right? Fundamentally, if you're interested in this show, and if the show thinks this about you, if you theorized about the murders in Sherlock and tried to solve them, the show thinks you're an idiot. If you theorized about John and Sherlock getting together, the show caught you and thinks you're an idiot. If you make your own metas to explain away plot holes and character inconsistencies, the show thinks you're an idiot. To me, ultimately, Sherlock as a text is exactly what fans feared all along. It is deeply disingenuous and just generally nihilistic, right? It is a show written by Stephen Moffat in the mode of all of his shows. And it's so unfortunate that we didn't have the body of his work at the time to reflect on and understand this is his maneuver. This is what he always does. To call back to a reading from season 2 that I offered us, this comes from quote. So this is from Archipelago Chia on Tumblr. Quote: "Relationships are unimportant. Character development non-existent. There's no arc. Dramatic plot points exist purely to be exciting and or amusing, and are easily dismissed or outright forgotten. It's an astoundingly different show, to the extent that if I wonder if that's even the intended surface at all, or if Moffat and Gaddis have been face-palming for 6 years. Before this, I had no idea it was even possible to see two such massively divergent shows while looking at the exact same thing. I'm absolutely floored. So they're describing how normal people watch the show. Relationships aren't important, characters don't develop, there's no arc, dramatic plot points are just to be exciting or amusing. And they've inadvertently described what the show is. And that's what's really interesting to me, is like, it's not that the show's bad, it's the things these people value in stories are of no interest to this story. At the end of the day, Sherlock is a witty, kind of entertaining character drama that kind of throws away the legacy of the source material in a vanity project through things like queerbaiting, intellectual pissing contests between its creators, and really just thinking anyone taking it seriously is stupid. And that's not me casting a value judgment on the creators. That is the way that the text is constructed. Despite that, I still kind of love it. This whole project, I come away, and the things I like the most are the chemistry of these characters, the flair. I like the styling of the show. Like we've been saying, as with everything Moffat's worked on, the casting's always great, the chemistry is excellent, the actors are always sensational. But I mean, literally by episode 2, we can already see the cracks in this mode of storytelling. In my view, I've said this before, Moffat wants to be a genius storyteller who wants to take up Gaiman's mantle and become like this prestige, bombast in the space who can do things no one else can. But there's a lack of humility, or I guess a willingness to cash a check, that I think will be Moffat's legacy forever. I mean, it will be the legacy of Sherlock forever. I have a lot of respect for Moffat and his body of work, but I think, I think his fingerprints on the industry and the things he's done will always be overshadowed by the way that these decisions kind of reveal where he places value in stories. It's about being clever, or being seen to be clever. It's about being seen to be complicated, not actually being complicated. It's about being seen to have interesting ideas, not having interesting ideas. It's all about the kind of vanity of it. And I genuinely just find that really unfortunate that they keep giving him tons of money to adapt all of these really, really important works. Those important works still exist, and it doesn't diminish the value of them, in the same way that you not liking The Last Jedi doesn't change how much you like A New Hope. Or the fact that perhaps you didn't enjoy the prequel trilogy doesn't change your enjoyment of the sequel trilogy. Those texts still exist. Moffat's work on Sherlock doesn't impact my enjoyment of the original source material, doesn't change my enjoyment of Elementary. I guess the point of projects like these, and the reason that I've worked in Media Crit for so long, is that unless we find ways to critique this stuff in its historical context, and we find ways to work through these things, we're not really offered an opportunity to learn from them, right? If you've listened to this show and you're part of a radicalized part of the internet, there's a chance that some of this maybe gave you some tools to analyze what you're looking at and the spaces you're in, and maybe begin to detach from them. There's always a hope that this might help one person develop a tool set to help themselves or help others, or perhaps read texts better. And like you said, better recognize what are those behaviors that I'm just replicating as responses to trauma. And when you begin to identify them, you're kind of empowered to change them. And so, I think to anyone that's made it this far into the show, or even if this is the first episode you're watching for some reason, or listening to, we like the show. I say this a lot, and I don't think people always hear it. If we didn't like it, we wouldn't have spent a million years talking about it. And Darth is a genuine fan, even though I think I broke him in the middle, and pieces are still getting put back together. But we're both fans of this show, and I think that's why it's important to talk this stuff through and critique it properly. Because if the show doesn't take itself seriously, and the people watching it did, I think it's really important that we take those people seriously and their engagement with the text seriously. Because ultimately everybody is a person just trying to work out what they're doing. And if we can add to the pile of tools and good things in the world that help people empathize with each other, read text better. I have a fundamental belief that fiction and your relationship to fiction has the ability to change you, has the ability to engage empathy, has the ability to help you become a better person and grow and change. And helping people develop tools or recognize tool sets for doing that. That in my view, if you are educated, it is your job to help educate the ignorant. If you are wealthy, it is your job to help provide money to the poor. If you have safety and security, it is your job to help people who do not, right? That is our responsibility. If you're a public figure, you owe what you have to the public. If you're educated, you owe what you have to the ignorant. Like these things that we want to try and put out into the world should reflect that, right? If you can bring everybody up with you, if you can bring everybody forward with you, that is how we kind of keep making things better. And for me, projects like this are critical to that end, because you shouldn't have to do a fucking master's in creative writing to understand this stuff. It should become accessible and available. You should be able to watch a show you like and start to put the pieces together. And so that's my usual end of... We're not ending the show. We've got a bit to go. But that's my usual, like, this series is over rant. I just wanted to hit on some of those points because I've touched on them throughout, but I wanted to gather them into a soundbite just to reiterate.
One of the most interesting things that you just said, which I actually did a whole video on, was saying that just because you don't like this version of Sherlock, that doesn't mean that you hate every version of Sherlock. And that's something that we see more and more, and I don't know why this is beginning to happen, but people seem unable to separate what they love from what they hate. So whether it's, The Last Jedi, or whether it's Rise of Skywalker, or whether it was the prequel trilogy, there are so many people that were like, this was bad, I can't like the entire franchise now because of this one thing. Same thing with like that one Doctor Who, the empty child lost, not empty child,
Timeless,
whatever, the angel child,
timeless child,
yeah, the little demon thing that shouldn't exist. But like, people say like, I can't like Doctor Who anymore. Like, no, you can separate out what you like and what you don't like. And my favorite example is Star Trek. Like, I think Star Trek fans do a fantastic job of saying like, I hate Deep Space Nine, but I love Voyager. And then the guy who hates Voyager and loves Deep Space Nine, he's like, okay, cool. We both like our stuff. That's fine. And it's like, I don't know why we've lost the ability to do that as a culture, but that's really what it feels like. And I guess that ties back into what I was saying, is like, people, it's part of their, growth is realizing that, I don't like this, but it's okay that I don't like this portion. That doesn't mean I have to hate this portion. If I think Luke was ruined in Last Jedi, I'll just skip it. It's an alternate universe. I don't have to pay attention to it. I don't have to hate Luke before that.
Yeah. It also there's also this implication that like, if you don't like something, then why are you talking about it or making content about it, right? I get that a lot from normal people, where they'll like, friends of mine know I'm doing this and are like,
freaking normies, man.
They're literally like, what are you...
I get that too. I get that.
They're like, what are you doing? You hate Sherlock. And I'm like, So I want to read you a quote that I really like, and this is someone interviewing Dr. Murray. And so the interviewer is Russ Worm. So Russ Worm says, quote, "Since academic work often fuses the pleasurable with the productive, either intentionally or not, can you reflect here on any complicated dynamics of pleasure and joy for you when it comes to teaching and researching and writing?" And Dr. Murray says this, is one of my favorite quotes of all time. And when people ask me why, I just send them a screenshot of this. Murray, quote, "Ironically, my productivity often comes from what bothers me about what I'm seeing rather than a pleasurable relation to the object of study. That is to say, I rarely write from a position of fandom, and I'm even slightly suspicious of myself if my work starts tilting in that direction. For example, my next research project requires, among other things, that I play quite a few military shooter games, which happens to not be my favorite genre, but I have some important things to say that require it. The pleasure comes later in contemplating and writing from a knowledgeable and rigorous position, made possible through a sustained engagement with these difficult objects of study." End quote. And I think it's easy to forget that academics is not a thing that most people do or would voluntarily do, because it requires that sustained engagement with text that you find difficult. And that is a, that's just a.
I was just writing down the phrase "people don't want to think."
It sucks.
then
Well,
you
it does. It sucks. Like, you have to play stuff that you don't enjoy. I just recently replayed the entirety of The Last of Us Part 2, which is a game I really don't like, because I had to do it for my Walking Dead video. I needed to make a claim and come at it with a rigorous position. And I spent 16 hours playing through a game that I don't really enjoy that much, that I find deeply depressing and nihilistic and gross. But I was able to get something really valuable from it. I could have spent that 16 hours rewatching Community and having a great time, but I didn't do that. I decided, I was like, I want to have this rigorous position, so I'm going to engage with this in a sustained manner. And that can be tricky to explain. It does sound quite slightly sadistic, but yeah, I mean, there's a reason most people don't want to do that, because it sucks. Like, if you didn't enjoy the show, if you didn't enjoy Sherlock, but you love this show, it's probably because you didn't want to have to go back and rewatch it, but you were able to get our synthesis without having to watch something you didn't enjoy. And that is a valuable thing. That's the value of academics, I think, is we do all the stuff that you don't want to do so that we can build on the body of works and learn from it.
Well, that's also a product of our day and age too, because I should think that hundreds and hundreds of years ago, before the advent of technology, it's nighttime, you're sitting, you got a fire in the hearth and everyone is just sitting there. It was much more common to just sit there and think. But right now, people are so busy constantly all the time. And so when they sit down and watch some, interact with whatever form of media, it's just pure entertainment, and having to think critically about it pulls them back into, wait, I don't want to think critically about it. This was my entertainment moment. Let me turn off my brain. I don't know if that's a good defense of it or not, but that definitely feels...
I know what you mean. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to watch a Bo Burnham clip together that talks about this, because I think it's really prescient to this conversation. And then I think what we'll do is we'll go through... I want to read through one section of the manuscript together. It's pretty short. It's basically a summary of Moffat's career, because I think it's probably a really good way to end this, is just kind of like work through... look, this is me trying to... This is the section where I'm like, he was good once. It's basically what this is. Then we can summarize our thoughts on the show and this project. Then we will kind of read the conclusion to the book, which is like the final chapter. It might change a little bit in the final edit, but it's mostly there. So we'll take a very quick break. I'm going to link you this video now so you can get set up to listen to it. And then we'll come back. We'll watch it together. We'll do a Darth live reacts to Bo Burnham. And then we can do some reading. So we'll be right back. We'll after probably a plug for the book. So that's probably what the ad is going to be here. But we'll be right back in just a sec. This season of Give Up After 3 is brought to you by the book of the same name, Give Up After 3, a historical analysis of Sherlock's lost final episode, where I take all of the research we've done from the show across the seasons and all of the learnings and findings and condense that into a full academic book. It's fun, it's lighthearted, but it also has a lot of the more interesting things we discovered and worked through. So if you want a way to support the show and also get something really interesting, you can find that at zeroindent.com/store. That's zeroindent.com/. Okay, 3, 2, 1, play.
What is a phone? What the definition of a phone changes every single day. Like, when's the right age to get a phone? I don't know, because by the time your kid gets to that age, a phone is a completely different thing spiritually. Like I'm saying, these things are like interacting with our souls on a deep level, and that's the problem with the internet, and that's the challenge obviously you guys have with young kids, is that, but it's like, yeah, good luck like having them like, when my kid's 9, he's not going to have an iPhone. Yeah, of course not, because it's going to be plugged into his head or whatever at that point, No, but truly, so like that's the really hard thing, is that, and even with formulating opinions or making art about the internet, by the time you take the time, this is the problem about the internet in general, by the time you take the time that is needed to think about something, to articulate it, it is obsolete. Kids are like walking through this like meta virtual reality world. It's not that they think the world in their phone is real. It's they think the world in the real world is virtual, and that this is actually just like a thing to be seen, and everything I'm doing is actually a performance that can be captured and looked back on at any moment.
Yeah.
And I'm not just living moments, I'm planning moments to look back on them. It's very, very strange and like heady. They're coming for every second of your life. That's what these companies are coming to. This company as well. And it's not because anyone is bad. It's not because anyone in this company has evil plans or is trying to do this. They're not even doing it consciously. It's because these companies like Twitter and YouTube and Instagram and everything, they went public and they went to shareholders. So they have to grow. Their entire models are based off of growth. They cannot stay stagnant. Twitter grossed $4-5 billion last year. It is in the red. It is unprofitable. It has to get more of you. That could be the ceiling for a place like this. YouTube, the ceiling could be 3 hours of engagement. No matter how nice it's trying to be, it is all that they're trying to get more engagement from you. We used to colonize land. That was the thing you could expand into, and that's where money was to be made. We colonized the entire earth. There was no other place for the businesses and capitalism to expand into, and then they realized human attention. That they are now trying to colonize every minute of your life. That is what these people are trying to do. Every single free moment you have is a moment you could be looking at your phone and they could be gathering information to target ads at you. That's what's happening. So like as much as we can, have really good conversations and try to humanize the conversations, the like mechanism of the business is rolling towards that just because of the market. So like, it's coming. It's coming for every free second you have. These content creators are wrestling with these difficult questions of the sort of weird meta, like hellscape that it is to be online. It's weird and it's complicated, and the kids know it and they sense it. That's why their memes are all ironic and detached and self-referential and 12 layers deep, because truth is completely dead to them and they know it. They look at the president, they look at the culture, they go, what the hell is this? They look at like Coca-Cola commercials that are winking at them and smiling, and they go like, forget it, So like, ugh, I have no idea what's gonna happen.
Alrighty then.
Yeah, it's something to think about, isn't it?
Yeah.
It really makes you go, oh, we're in trouble, aren't we? I love that photo. Yeah. Okay, cool. Let's, sorry, any thoughts off the back of that other than yikes and oh my god, we're all doomed?
Yeah, I wish I was like taking notes while he was talking, because there is so much he said that just like struck a nerve. One thing that I wanted to do like an entire video on this at some point, because it is so fascinating to me, is like I'll start playing a video game way after its popularity has taken a nosedive. I'll do like when my video on Kylo Ren finally comes out, people are going to ask me, why did you do this? It is so far past when the movie came out.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like they assign importance based on, I don't know if it's the popularity or how frequently it's being talked about, but there's a time limit to it. And it's like theta decay in options in the stock market. It's like if it gets too long, people don't want to hear about it, or they perceive it as less valid. But like the points I will make are the same points no matter when in time I make them. They will have as much validity no matter when I say them, but they're perceived as less valuable the further away from the instance that it gets, because it's less in the minds of the culture at that point in time, because they're focused on some other part of their iPhone. I don't know. Like, so everything he said just like really hit hard, because I'm like, hey, I'm picking up like Titanfall 2 now, and they're like, it's been out for 5 years. Why are you picking it up now? I'm like, because I want to play it.
You're like, because I want to play the best single player campaign in any shooter game of all time. Is what you would say to them. If you haven't played Titanfall 2, buy it for like $7. It'll be really cheap. Play that campaign. It's absolutely incredible. Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, why am I doing this show now? It's a great question, but it shouldn't matter. Like, yeah, people people assign value, or they make a value assessment based on the immediacy of something. Is your hot take out quick enough to attract the attention, right? When I used to do our podcast Art for Artists, something that we did sometimes is we would get a press screener for something, or we'd see it early, or we'd go to the press event, and then we'd have our episode up like the day the thing comes out. And it would get really popular because it was like the first piece of content someone could watch about it. Particularly in Australia, where sometimes we get things like fully 2 or 3 days before everybody else. What I used to hate about that is it attracted the wrong kind of audience. So it would get popular, but it would be people that don't understand what we do and don't understand why we're doing it. And so they would watch us talk about, say, BoJack Horseman season 6, and be critical or talk about it in a philosophical way. And they'd be like, well, if you didn't like it, why are you fucking talking about it? Just shut up. And it's like, oh, because you don't understand what it is we're doing here. And there's a way in which the audiences that are seeking that immediacy are almost never... The Venn diagram for them being the kinds of people that you want in your community is very, very slim. And so, for my money, I often will deliberately wait and then make some content about something, because I know by that point it's going to be the core audience that are going to engage with it in the appropriate kind of way to what the content is, and not just react to it because it's new, which sounds counterintuitive, but that's also part of what I've always done, which is like I do things that make our content deliberately not viral because I don't want that kind of foundation for a community.
Well, an interesting way of looking at that is like, I remember when The Force Awakens came out, and it was, the first Star Wars film in years, and there was, I'm sure, a huge subset of the fandom that as soon as they walked out of the theater, they went home, they got on YouTube because they wanted to see what opinions people had about it. I remember calling up one of my best friends, and we talked for hours on the phone, forming our own opinions about what we just watched and how it ties into the universe that came before it. And at some point, days later, after we had been thinking about it and still forming our own opinions, then we would get on the internet. And that wasn't necessarily intentional, but it was like it's like two different mindsets that people have. It's either I need to know what people think, or I need to understand what I think before I even try to understand what someone else thinks. So
the first thing I think, to slightly modify it, a better phrasing is I need to be told what to think, right? They need to know what the popular consensus is and adopt that. Or if they're a contrarian, do the opposite, right? But like, they need to know what the general consensus is, because that should inform how valid their opinion is. And then they'll adopt whichever opinion they think. Yeah.
Which I mean, on the one hand, that sounds abhorrent for people to not have more of a free will than that. But on the other hand, like, humans are basically like a herd population, and we will go with the flow, and we want to do what everyone else is doing. And, part of me says, I don't know if we should really talk down to the people that they just want to do what everyone else is doing, because the common person with a common IQ, they don't need to do anything more than that. They go with the flow, they go with what everyone else is doing, and that's enough to keep them happy.
Yeah. And they probably like generally enjoy life more. I would imagine.
I mean, there's I don't remember where it comes from. Hopefully it's not made up, that like the smarter you are, the more you hate life, because you actually understand all of the things that are screwing you over. And it's the dumber people that are the happiest, because they just don't see all the terrible stuff.
Yeah, they don't have to suffer. Yep. Okay, so let's read through one of these prelude chapters. Then we can kind of summarize our thoughts, and then we'll close out, I guess, with the ending of the book that I've written based on the show. So if you want to go to page 182, I've highlighted the section where it starts.
Was this the man who broke Doctor Who?
Yeah.
Okay.
I figure we could just do a paragraph on, paragraph off. So I'll read the first one, you read the next one. We'll go through it like that.
All right.
Just that, because I feel like people are probably sick of hearing me fucking read shit. So I was like, oh, we'll mix it up. And then the final chapter, I'm going to need you to do your excellent Sherlock voice. So look forward to that.
I'll have to develop one of those real quick. Hold
Yeah.
on. Yeah.
Okay, so this is part of the introduction, and this title is chapter. This chapter is titled "The Man Who Broke Doctor Who." To understand where Sherlock's showrunner Stephen Moffat emerged from, we have to consider the state of public broadcast television in the UK at the turn of the millennia. In 2001, the British Comedy Awards nominated Coupling for Best TV Comedy, but ultimately David Renwick's One Foot in the Grave won. One Foot had been running for 5 seasons by 2001 and was looking to wrap up. The 2001 Best TV Comedy Award was more of a send-off for the show than one of merit in hindsight, as The Office won the Best New TV Comedy Series that year, despite the argument it probably should have won both categories. This seems to be a fairly common practice at these awards. The best TV show is saved for a lifetime achievement of a program rather than its success that year.
That same year, Russell T Davies won the British Comedy Awards Best Writer Award, largely for his work on Bob and Rose, as it tackled LGBTIQ plus rights in Manchester and was one of the first mainstream British representations of homosexual relationships with the same complexity, drama, and realism as heteronormative relationships on TV. This, despite, in Davies' own words, "I didn't even think Bob and Rose was a comedy, really."
In 2003, Coupling, a comedy drama about 6 friends in their early 30s, won Best TV Comedy. On the winning show, James Monaco commented, he's an English dude, but you can do this however you want. James Monaco, he sounds a bit like this. He's got a bit of a Cockney voice, but you may do whatever accent you so desire. Actually, do you have like do you have like a good Texan accent or something? Do you have like any good like American regional accents you can do? Like, can you do like a Boston?
Boston. We got a cup of coffee and the dog from Boston. Yeah, but I can only do those specific words in the Boston accent. After that, it totally flies away. I gotta be around my really southern friends for a while before I get the southern accent down. So I'm just gonna do it in standard American.
Oh, default American. You know the accent.
Coupling is witty and elegantly structured, taking the Seinfeld/Friends model to new heights with intricately wrought plots built on interactions of 6 young friends. Replete with rich dialogue and bright timing, it renewed the British comedy franchise.
And that one's from Monaco 2009. As a result of this award, the writer of Coupling drew the attention of Russell T Davies, the now executive producer of one of the BBC's longest-running TV programs and cultural exports, Doctor Who. Davies' run of Doctor Who, while praised for inventive episodes and ideas, struggled against its own tone. That Davies is so comfortable working in serial television is why he was the right choice for showrunner. Episodes ran the gamut from ridiculous rubber costumes to deep, existential character reflections that sought to understand the core of the Doctor's very humanity.
Episodes like Dalek would go on to win a Hugo Award for short-form drama, Gebhardt 2006. Dalek was Davies' reintroduction of the iconic villain from Doctor Who canon, but rather than a resplendent adventure, the episode, penned by Robert Sherman, was dark. The plot is an exploration of the Doctor's torturous anger at the loss of his peoples and his struggle to recover the shreds of humanity he once had.
There are quite a few strangely sexual jokes that create friction against the tone of the episode in a way that never quite resolves, but overall the episode is a triumphant exploration of Christopher Eccleston's Doctor. The episode's successes are derived from a few key limitations. The series opened with a workable budget, per Julie Gardner, forcing episodes to be streamlined. There weren't stacks of cash to blow on post effects. The writers had to create compelling premises on a budget. These early episodes feel like budget film ideas shot like local theatre stage plays. You can read these dot points if you want.
As an episode, Dalek succeeds for a few key reasons. The episode could take place on a stage. There are no elaborate stunts, and most effects are practical, requiring minimal post effects. The Doctor and Rose are challenged morally, ideologically,
ethically.
Ethically, not challenged.
Ethically.
So not ethnically.
Not
All right.
ethnically challenged, but ethically.
Good to hear.
But I'm ethically challenged by the fact that you thought I would write ethnically challenged.
And are changed by the end of the episode. And number 3, the adventure is contained. You can pick up this episode and watch it without any context for the rest of the show and still understand both what is happening, the stakes, and the consequences.
These are the characteristics of the best episodes of Davies' work, particularly in his first season. And so our architect enters the picture. Stephen Moffat was brought on to write the 2-part double feature, The Empty Child and The Doctor Dances. He previously worked on a grip of short fiction for Doctor Who, and even wrote The Curse of Fatal Death, a comic relief Doctor Who sketch.
While Davies' initial work on Who Was Dark, The Empty Child was downright terrifying. This episode gave me nightmares as a kid, and is still confronting. But as the 2-parter continued, the horror gave way to Moffat's traditional humor, wit, and pacing. The episode alludes to lots of interesting world building and references to the wider time travel fabrica, and is more interesting for doing so.
The episode is a triumph of restraint. Under Davies' direction, Moffat was able to write a brilliant, self-contained, 2-part episode that expands on the Doctor's character, sees our main characters change, and hints at a larger world without going too far. The episodes are praised for being dark, but ultimately the ending is happy. Literally everyone is saved, and it's kind of a triumph. The stakes are very high, but by not giving up and by trusting Rose, the Doctor was able to emerge victorious.
As Moffat took over as showrunner, the focus of the program shifted. Unlike Davies' seasons, Moffat's stories centered on the persona of the Doctor. Stories progressively made the Doctor more and more important, to the point where he became the most important person in the universe. This issue percolates through Moffat's work, where each protagonist he writes unified towards the same basic archetype, and each story he tells can't help but dote entirely on the protagonist and how important they are.
Every protagonist Moffat writes is more or less the same. A smart, capable man who doesn't care for the rules of polite society. Jekyll, Sherlock, Chalk all center brilliant, tactless men who are imbued with some special talent for solving problems and creating chaos.
Chalk focuses on Eric Slatt, the deputy headmaster of a school who got himself into as many problems as he solved with his brash intellect. He's periodically aggressive, always sarcastic, and prone to lapses in judgment when his ego gets the better of him. In this way, Moffat's approach differed somewhat from the CBS procedural police consultant with a special gift trend of the era, where contemporaries like Elementary and The Mentalist are intensely interested in seeing their protagonists grow and become active participants in society. Moffat has little interest in rehabilitation. In fact, his texts often indicate that these protagonists are right to remain outside of polite society, for this is where they are most effective.
It's hard to tell if this is a self-conscious criticism, that perhaps Moffat is reflecting on his own behaviors as a brilliant but rude screenwriter who struggles to care about fitting in. Whatever their motivation, this results in very smart, arrogant men yelling at other people on screen. Moffat had written a successful season of Doctor Who when he turned his attention to Sherlock, targeting a modern reimagining on the classic stories. One filled with James Bond-esque intrigue with the snappy dialogue of Firefly and the plot twist of Lost. And so begins the story of Sherlock Holmes. And then the intro music plays. Yeah, I think it's just when I was originally doing all the research for this, I think it's really interesting that the best episodes of Doctor Who that Moffat wrote were under Davies as a showrunner. When Moffat was contained and someone was saying no and saying, you can't do these things, no, don't do that, he writes really excellent television. But the second he's a showrunner, it just gets away from him. It's really interesting. Thoughts, feelings, emotions, concerns. Also, that was very funny to hear you read the way that I talk and be like, why is there a comma there? What is happening?
Was I really doing that?
There was a few lines where you were like, oh, the sentence will end here, and then I've done like an M dash, and like very funny. You did well though. It was good. Cool. Okay, let's let's go to page 211. I'll highlight that again.
All right, so this is me playing Sherlock, huh?
Yeah. So I'll do everything else. You get to be Sherlock. Before we do this, because actually no, let's do this and then we can do our wrapping up thoughts. Okay, so this is the final chapter of the book. An aside, 11:59 p.m. Moonlight poured into Baker Street. The ajar window let in the chill autumn breeze. Sherlock looked at me for a long moment. He glanced at the wall clock.
Midnight,
He noted.
he noted.
You don't do
The
that.
witching hour. But I wanted to say it.
I know. Okay. Imagine he's like kind of being melancholic in this as well. What happened after that? I asked again.
Would you like to know why you'll never be the writer you want to be?
He asked. Sherlock, I
mean, it's so obvious. The pretentious jacket, the hair product, the beard to compensate for your weak chin, doing all you can not to be a product of your childhood, the banal and exhausting obsession with storytelling. Here's a story for you. Failed writer is so insecure that by the time women fall in love with him, they no longer like him, claiming to be a feminist but only dating damaged women, time and time again. Failing again and again to treat them as people. What is it like to lie to yourself every single day?
How could you even...
It must be so dull in your head. You've been here for hours and you've yet to glean a single detail I did not offer. Hardly an interview if I'm doing your job for you.
You're deflecting, I said. I asked what happens next. What happened to John after Euros? Sherlock rubbed his face. He stood, trudged to the wooden cabinet by the fireplace. He took out a corked bottle, placed 2 crystal tumblers on the coffee table. He poured us both a scotch. He sat in his chair by the window, gazing at the dark street below or the night sky beyond. Anywhere but at me. Are you okay? I finally said.
You know, it's funny. They claim that love is universal, a trite idea at best and ignorant. The only thing everyone experiences, the only true universal currency, is death.
I closed my laptop, took my whiskey to the seat next to him by the window. Off the record, tell me what happened.
Why do you care?
Sherlock, you're a human being. I care what happened to you. Sherlock laughed from the back of his throat, an ugly, spiteful sound.
John, once things returned...
For this, sorry. For this, I won't do the interstitials, but for this, imagine he's like just being sad and reflective. I don't know if that's going to change your voice. I like that I'm pushing your acting skills. It's very entertaining.
I really just wanted to like throw out a Celtic accent or something. when Sherlock is sad, he changes his voice.
Which may pitch perfect.
John, once things returned to normal, it was just us. We worked cases, solved problems for clients. Mycroft disappeared for months on end, never said where he went, but he was avoiding us.
Why? What was he doing?
Going for long stretches, more than 2 weeks, less than 12. International travel seemed unlikely due to his importance to the British intelligence. I suppose he might have had a woman in the country, but Mycroft with a woman?
Sherlock shook his head.
He was visiting Yoris and seeing a doctor. Father Time found him early. Cancer, in the end. I lost myself for a while. Drugs, drinking, anything I could get my hands on, you see. Hard to feel a loss so keen in a haze. I think you know what I mean.
I nodded, didn't offer an explanation. I'd learned days ago that he already knew about my history of avoidance.
While I was indisposed, Jim Moriarty came back.
I read that in the blog, I offered gently.
John found me. Moriarty had Rosie.
He stared at his knuckles.
I could barely walk straight. Moriarty's plan was rather devious. He preyed upon my grief, ensuring I couldn't say no to his offer. I joined him in exchange for Rosie, and I liked it. We did some awful things until I finally bested him.
He made you like him, I said. Sherlock sipped his drink, finally turned his gaze on me. Beneath the curls of hair, his eyes were wide.
I tricked him with Molly's help, then I hurt him for a long time until my knuckles bled. Molly stopped me. He's been locked up ever since. After that, she helped me get clean. Well,
He looked at his scotch.
she helped me find something close to normal. Euros helped. We've been talking, you know? And, well, John, it was just us for a while, so you understand. Molly was out of the country for a conference, Rosie at John's parents. One day we were given a bottle of wine from a client. Saved his brother's job, a financial scam, a rather complex one. John, after a few wines, well, we...
Sherlock, you don't have to tell me, I said. He sipped his scotch, stared out the window. The moonlight fell on his sharp cheekbones. The brake lights of a taxicab on the street caught his eye, making it a pool of red for a fleeting moment.
John had developed feelings, you see. Feelings I tried to return.
Oh, Sherlock. Sherlock reached into his trouser pocket, appeared a packet of cigarettes. He struck a match on his thumbnail, touched the flame to the tip and inhaled. The orange glow flickered over his features, making his face soft for a moment.
I tried for a time, but we clashed, argued constantly. Big, ugly things, the kind that are irreversible. And so he left. Took a job with Sarah in the country. It's been a year since we've spoken. They married, I think.
The blog, I said, it's still running as if he's here.
Molly, who else? She is quite the author, it turns out. Euros helps me solve them. Molly runs the blog. Could teach you a thing or two about writing as it happens.
I don't doubt that. The door to the flat opened and Irene Adler strolled in. She wore Sherlock's huge wool trench coat over a dark dress. Oh god, I'll have to do Irene. Okay. How does she even sound? She's like, ew. Oh, hello, she said. I didn't realize we had company.
Irene, this is the author.
David, I said, and shook Irene's hand. Wonderful to meet you.
She's quite the fan.
Really? Oh yes, I've read the Maynard series and all. Absolutely thrilling. Oh, I felt my ears burn and knew my cheeks were flushing. I cannot wait for the fourth one. Love a big finish. I chuckled. Me too.
Mr. McNeil was just...
Sherlock began. Leaving. I have everything I need and I don't want to impose. Sherlock straightened in his chair. He kissed Irene on the cheek.
Give me a few minutes, I'll be in.
Lovely to meet you, she said and disappeared down the corridor. The bedroom door shut with a small click. I didn't realize. Sherlock shrugged.
I love her.
He said, as if it were a matter of scientific fact.
What more is there to it?
You're different than I expected. You're a decent man, Sherlock Holmes. If you get out of your own way, you might be a good one someday.
I apologize for what I said earlier.
Sherlock offered. Smiled. Don't worry about it. From one junkie to another. I bundled my laptop and briefcase under one arm, pulled on my coat, popped the collar, and offered Sherlock a wink. I made for the door, hesitated with one hand on the handle. I'd say I'd text you when the book is out, but you'd already know, being attenuated to every strand of data, right?
Even I can't know everything.
He flourished his dressing gown, offered me a wide, wolfish grin.
May I offer you some advice?
Sure. I said. And Sherlock hesitated.
My brother told me this before he removed himself from the process of treatment. I think you may need to hear it. It has to be okay if there is no grand game afoot. Sometimes things are messy, and we must embrace the ambiguity or be devoured by it. Life is little more than collections of good things and bad things. We must seek the good ones when we can, and have the grace to allow the bad ones to pass us by.
He paused, as if he might say more. He stuck out his hand and we shook. Then he disappeared down the corridor, dressing gown trailing after him. I shut the door, trudged down the stairs, and stepped into the London evening, leaving 221B Baker Street. I'd be back there one day, for more was afoot that night than either of us could have imagined. But that is a story for another day.
Blasted stingers. Why you gotta put that?
You know we trying to get you on that sequel, baby.
Might as well have had Moriarty pop up at the end there.
You see Darth being like, wait, but what's the next story? Yeah, so the book should be out by the time this season airs. It's been a really interesting exercise. Part of the device that I've constructed is, as we kind of investigated earlier, and as you've just seen here, is, I'm interviewing Sherlock about these events after all of these things, which got me the opportunity in these final chapters to kind of write a speculative season 5, I guess. And I was trying to incorporate, as part of the exercise, incorporate a lot of the theories that people on Tumblr had, but try and make them fit into the show properly. And that required a lot of finesse and consideration to be like, okay, well, like, if they did have a relationship that was romantic, what would the outcome of that be? Because it wouldn't work. Like, they're just incompatible in that way. And then obviously one of the biggest, things people wanted was for Irene and Sherlock to get together. And I don't think there's a sustainable way for Sherlock and John to be the Baker Street boys because of that romantic disentanglement. And so I kind of put all that stuff together and was trying to find a way to finesse what would that potential season 5 look like and what would the outcomes of it be. So it was a really fun exercise, and really, required me to kind of put myself in the shoes of the fans on the internet at the time. But yeah, it was good. It was good fun. And just really fun to write Sherlock bullying me. That's always interesting. It's always funny as hell because he's so mean. But yeah, so that's sort of the mechanism of the book there. It goes some really interesting places in the middle. It's longer than I planned it to be, but hopefully if you enjoy the show, I'd super recommend you buy it. There'll be an audiobook for it as well. I might sneakily get Darth to do the Sherlock voice for that. We'll see how we go.
I don't know. Your Irene voice was just spot on.
Oh, thank you.
So
yeah. I'm always talking to myself in the mirror as Irene Adel. That's why. Look, that's
now
all.
I've been defrocked.
Oh my god! I don't think he knows where to look. Good grief. Yeah. Good fun. Okay, closing thoughts. So talk to me about this project as a whole. What are your big takeaways? Where's your head at with everything now that we've kind of worked through, basically the last 9 months of talking about the show and literary theory.
Good gracious.
Yeah, I know. It's something to think about, isn't it?
Yeah, that's enough time to...
Technically, this show has been in production for 11 months because I started pre-production on the 3rd of January, I think. So that's something to think about. But yeah, we recorded our first episode, I think, in February or March.
Goodness gracious. Time to grow an entire human being. But I guess your book is the baby that came out of this.
Yeah. Since that time, I've moved apartments twice. All of my belongings got flooded, and then I've bought an apartment. So a lot's happened since then.
So takeaway thoughts. One thing that's kind of interesting is that I had anticipated that this entire endeavor might just utterly ruin the show for me. Mm-hmm. But it's like when you are able to pick apart something in such detail and find out both what's good and what's bad, it kind of gives you more of an appreciation for the good things. And so I would say that this entire thing has not utterly ruined the show, but it will. I need to go back and rewatch it again now that I've gone through all of this, because I'm curious. I anticipate that I will very much enjoy it because I've already identified the problems. We've identified why they were problems, what could have been a solution for them, and it's kind of like you've already gone through the stages of grief. And now that I've gone through those with Sherlock and identified all the problems, and I've yelled about them, I've tried to ignore that they exist, I've tried to reason with them, I've gone through my stages, and now I can just enjoy what is there and accept what is there.
Mm-hmm.
And this is reality, and I could take the good with the bad and just move forward and enjoy it.
Yeah, you're at the acceptance part of the process.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I will say it's been fascinating watching, your progression through the show. I think probably the most enjoyable thing for me has been able to, as we work through stuff, give names and structures and theories to things that you're already sensing are happening, and being able to kind of render those out as like, well, this is how that literary theory works, and this is why you had that feeling. And that's been a really exciting thing to watch, because I think it's... some of the episodes were deeply theoretical, others a bit more practical in their readings. But I think that's like the show ebbs and flows in how seriously it takes itself. And so it was cool to feel us ebb and flow with the depth of what we were digging into based on how interested the show was in itself. I just thought that was a really interesting pattern I've noticed as I've been editing, where some episodes where the show doesn't care about itself, we kind of fall off of it pretty heavily, and then ones where it does, we have a lot to say and a lot to dig into. I mean, I feel like I learned a lot through this process. I always do when we do projects like this. This won't be the last unnecessarily long, revision of content that we do. We've got a few ideas in the pipe. It's just gonna be a question of timing and production. But, I think my plan with all of these is I want to do one of these projects a year at least. I'm working on I've got two in the pipe for next year. And hopefully sort of produce non-fiction books off the back of them. So produce academic books where it makes sense. I have a deep desire to do one on Daredevil, which I'm doing with my buddy Patrick from Method to the Madness. We want to do something with Community at some point. I definitely want to do Disco Elysium. I just have to convince someone to do that with me. I've got a bunch of ideas of this kind of thing. If you like this sort of content, it's not super popular, right? It requires a very specific kind of person who is looking for this sort of thing. So if you do find value in the stuff, you do find it interesting, do consider supporting us, whether it's buying a copy of the book, whether it's joining the Patreon, whether it's like leaving a comment or review, whatever that is. Go check out Darth's channel, subscribe to that on YouTube. You're going to get some really interesting Star Wars thoughts. We've done a bunch of stuff over there. We will continue to do stuff. We'll probably take a break because I feel like we need a holiday, a vacay, all right? Because this has been intense. We'll be back in the new year with some goodness. We got a few ideas we want to work on. Is there anything you want to plug? Any kind of final thoughts on the exercise, or is that all she wrote?
I kind of want to do the bit that I was going to do to open up this entire thing, but now it doesn't make any more sense. But I'm just going to do it because I got all the crap sitting here. So starting off the entire episode.
Oh my God. The amount of prop comedy that you have done on this show is unbelievable. It's unbelievable. For a show where so we get maybe 100 views per episode on YouTube. We get maybe 5,000 to 10,000 on the podcast feeds. So most people aren't seeing. So go on. Yeah, do the bit. What do you got?
Okay, so all right, so we just sat down and you're like, tell me what you thought about this secret fourth episode. And I was gonna be like, can we talk about anything else? Like I would really love to talk about my Pokemon collection.
Oh my God.
We could come and look at all of my different cards, or we could talk about comic books. You want to talk about comic books instead? We could do like a little music section, Oh, that's not your kind of music. Hold on, there's different. Okay. Well, if you don't like that, we could talk about pottery, because I've done all kinds of pottery. I used to love throwing on a pottery wheel. Or if you don't like that stuff, I've got my knife collection around here. We could start looking at knives and different swords and all that kind of stuff. Or then we've got Star Wars. We could look at all my Star Wars memorabilia. There's all kinds of things that we could talk about instead of talking about this abhorrent episode that doesn't tie into Sherlock whatsoever. So now we can start with the episode proper.
That was a good bit. That was a solid bit. That was a solid bit, I feel.
So now I can go and put it at the very beginning.
Yeah,
of the
now
episode.
you can edit. Yeah, you can lie to the viewers. You can lie to them. I think. Look, I'm impressed. Solid bit. Solid stuff. Lots of stuff there. Like I like that it's like all nerd shit, and it's just like, oh yeah, my knife collection. It's like nerd shit, nerd shit, nerd shit, America.
I should have had like a dozen donuts sitting here too.
Yeah. What's like
and then a cheeseburger or something.
I was gonna say like a massive burger. Like some kind. Everything in America is bigger than it needs to be. Like I feel is the vibe. Like a 2-liter drink of something, sugary drink.
Yep.
Look, if we were doing this and the time zones weren't so bad, then I would the most Australian thing that you would see me doing every episode is just drinking beer after beer after beer after beer, because that is all you do in Australia, because there's nothing else to do here. Look, yeah, I want to sincerely say thank you to everybody for watching, listening, subscribing, commenting, following it along. 2 special thank yous I need to do. Thank you to Pat Laverne. He's given me some ideas very early on in the pre-production. And then thank you to Laura Berger as well, who's been watching along and sort of keeping me abreast of a few different bits and pieces. Thank you to the few people that have emailed me with questions or ideas or suggestions. There were some corrections as well, which I didn't end up putting in the show, but appreciate you reaching out. If you're listening to this, Stephen Moffat, or you know someone that knows Stephen Moffat, email me. Okay, one day I'm gonna interview that man. And thanks to you as well, Darth, for coming along on this journey. It was a leap of faith, and it's taken the better part of a year, but I think we've made something pretty interesting and weirder than I ever thought it would be. So that's always
the entire
good.
premise of this was you saying, "I'm going to make you hate this show." That's where this all came from. It's one video clip and then you're like, oh, I don't think that's possible. I think for a few episodes I did. I think I did for a while. I think there was a moment where you were real worried that I might have won. Just some soulless gazing into the middle distance. Yeah, I'll give you credit, because my opinion of it definitely was diminished, but not totally broken. So half success on your part.
I'll take it. Look, the only other things always worth plugging is probably around the time this comes out, my 3rd novel, Maynard Trigg and the Vanishing Empire, is either out or is about to come out. So if you fancy fiction, you can go to maynardtrigg.com and find those books, or you can go and buy the non-fiction book based on the show. As I said, really fun. That framing device ended up paying dividends. And it sort of takes all this together and develops a framework around it. So definitely go check that out. I don't think there's anything else I wanted to plug. I'm part of the Black Swan Society Collective. You can find us at twitch.tv/Black Swan Society or BLAK Swan Society everywhere. That's where we do kind of weirder, sort of comedy-ish, very strange experimental stuff. I do that with my buddy James. We do the advisory every Thursday at 6 p.m. AEST. Or you can catch the VODs on all the different podcast catches for everything we do. I'm always working on new stuff. By the time this comes out, the Daredevil show will either be started or about to come out as well. I don't have a name for that yet, but follow A Method to the Madness on Spotify, and you should be set up to grab a link to that whenever it does come out. But yeah, that's all the stuff. I'm always doing too many things at once. Now I'm like, I don't want to end the show, because when we end the show, the show's done. But we all good things must come to an end, much like Stephen Moffat's Sherlock. You got to finish it somewhere, even if it doesn't feel as satisfying as you hope it would have. That's going to do it for Give Up After 3. This has been an exploration of BBC Sherlock. There's been a critique. This has been a spiritual journey, frankly. Once again, thank you so much for watching or listening. And we will catch you guys around the internet with our next project. Before you know it, by the time this comes out, we'll probably have already started because this is coming out in like 3 months. So because of how time works, you might already have the next thing we're working on. Seriously though, appreciate everybody's support, appreciate the insights, appreciate the emails, the engagement, everything you guys have done. And if you think someone who may enjoy the show, send them a link to it, encourage them to listen, send them your favorite bits, let us know your favorite bits. And if there's other stuff you want us to cover, send them going, man, I'd love to hear Darth and David talk about this thing. Shoot us an email, drop us a comment, whatever you might want to see us cover next. We may ignore it and do our planned stuff anyway, but it might, help inform future plans. If it's Star Wars related, chances are we'll probably cover it at some point. But yeah, that's gonna do it. Thank you so much for watching and listening. See you guys later. That's it. It's done.
I know. I need to set off fireworks or something. I mean,
It's done. Fireworks. You're in America. You probably have those.